Welcome to Unwritten Asia. We bring you weekly Asian history that are not on the textbook, from an insider perspective. Today we're going to talk about an unknown hero who advanced the computer infrastructure of the world, Charles Kao. There's a man you've almost certainly never heard of, and right now, at this exact moment, his idea is carrying your voice, your messages, your video calls, your entire digital life across the ocean floor. His name is Charles Kao, and the story of how a quiet Chinese-British engineer rewired the planet is one of the most overlooked origin stories in modern history. Here's what I want you to hold on to. Before Kao came along, the people who ran the world's telecommunications industry told him directly to his face that what he was trying to do was physically impossible. Let's go back to the early 1960s. The world communicated through copper wire. Long-distance phone calls travelled as electrical signals through copper cables, and those cables had a serious problem. The signal degraded fast. The further it had to travel, the weaker it got. To send a call from London to New York, engineers had to install amplifiers every few miles along the cable to boost the signal back up. It was expensive, it was slow, and there was a hard ceiling on how much information you could push through copper before the whole system collapsed. The internet, as we'd eventually know it, was physically impossible on copper. Around this same time, a young researcher named Charles Kao was working at a small lab in Harlow, England. Standard telecommunication laboratories, not Bell Labs, not MIT, a modest British industrial research facility. Kao had been born in Shanghai in 1933, raised partly in Hong Kong, educated in London. He was, by all accounts, methodical, soft-spoken, and deeply curious about a deceptively simple question. What if, instead of pushing electrical signals through copper, you pushed light through glass? The idea wasn't completely new. Scientists had been playing with light-guiding glass fibers since the 1950s, but there was a problem. Every time you sent light through a glass fiber, more than about 20 meters long, almost all of it disappeared. The glass absorbed the light. The signal simply died. The industry consensus, and this is important, was that glass was just too impure, that no matter how good your manufacturing got, you'd never be able to get glass clean enough to carry light over any useful distance. The physics, they said, just didn't work. Charles Kao didn't accept that. Here's the part the textbook version of this story always skips. Kao didn't just have a hunch, he did the maths. And the maths told him something the entire industry had missed. In 1966, Kao and his colleague George Hockham published a paper in a British engineering journal. The paper made a specific, textable claim. The reason glass fiber lost so much light wasn't fundamental physics. It was impurity. The glass being used at the time contained metallic ions, tiny traces of iron, copper, other contaminants, and those impurities were absorbing the light. If you could make glass pure enough, and Kao calculated exactly how pure, you could carry light over distances of kilometres, not meters. That was the wow moment, not a discovery, a calculation, a prediction. Kao wasn't announcing that it worked. He was saying, here is precisely why it doesn't work yet, and here is exactly what it would take to fix it. The industry's response? Largely dismissal. A major glass manufacturer back then initially considered the purity targets Kao described as practically unachievable. Kao spent the next several years travelling the world, visiting glass manufacturers, giving lectures, pushing for someone, anyone, to attempt to manufacture glass to his specifications. Most doors didn't open, but here's where the story turns. And this is the part that makes the whole thing feel almost improbable. By 1970, just 4 years after Kao's paper, a team at Corning Glass Works, the same company that had serious doubts, produced the first fibre that met Kao's target, They'd found a way to make glass that was effectively purer than anything that had existed before in human manufacturing. That fibre could carry light over 1 kilometre with acceptable signal loss. By the end of the 1970s, the technology had improved so fast that commercial fibre optic cables were being laid. By the end of the 1980s, the first transatlantic fibre cable was in the ground. The people who told Kao it was impossible weren't villains. They were working from the only data available at the time, which genuinely showed that glass couldn't do it. What Kao did that nobody else had done was separate two questions that everyone else had collapsed into one. The question of whether current glass could carry light, and the question of whether glass, in principle, ever could. Those are completely different questions. He answered the second one, and he was right. And the maths Kao did, that specific calculation about impurity levels and loss thresholds, that calculation is why you can video call someone on the other side of the world without a delay. It's why streaming works. It's why the internet is fast. An estimated 5 billion kilometres of fibre optic cable now runs across the planet. A quiet engineer in a small English lab did one calculation in 1906, and that single piece of maths is the reason the internet exists. Kao won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2009, more than 40 years after the paper that made it all possible. By then, he was living with Alzheimer's disease. His wife, Gwen, accepted much of the public attention on his behalf. Unfortunately, he died in 2018. The cables he made possible are still being laid today. Every submarine cable route across the Pacific, every data center connection, all of it traces back to a 1966 paper that most people in the industry didn't want to read. If there's one thing Kao's story keeps bringing me back to, it's this. The people who called his idea impossible weren't wrong about the evidence they had. They were wrong about which question they were answering. Kao asked the right questions and pushed the whole industry, if not the whole world, forward. Subscribe if you want more Asian stories like this, not the textbook version, the one that explains from an insider angle. Also, drop a comment. What do you think is the one invention that most people use every day but couldn't name the inventor of? I have a feeling Charles Kao is going to show up a lot. Next week, we're going to a coffee shop. Specifically, we're going to find out why a particular ingredient found inside one of Asia's most popular coffee drinks is the same ingredient historically used to preserve corpses. That's not a metaphor, that's what's in the cup. See you then.